Learn how to create a wave defense game without coding using GDevelop. GDevelop is a no-code open-source game engine. This beginner's tutorial covers player movement, firing a bullet, enemy logic, spawning enemies, and more. There's a link in the description to download all the free assets used in this game.
In this video, I'm going to go over how to make a wave defense game with GDevelop, the no-code open-source game engine. So here I've created a blank project. No events, no objects, no nothing. The first thing I need to do is change the properties because the assets I'm using are designed for 768 by 432. Now the first thing I'm going to do is set up the area we'll be playing in. This is going to be a wave defense game starting out on a single screen. So I'll create the sprite object for the floor. Alright. Now I'm going to go to the event sheet, and at the beginning of scene, I'm going to zoom the camera in, and then center that camera on the object. And there we go. I just realized I need to change the properties for importing assets. If you saw, the image was a little blurry because it's pixel art. And so now that I've imported that image in, I need to change the smoothing. Alright, there we go. Nice and crisp. So now that I have the room, I'm going to add the sprite object for the player character. One animation being for run, and the other being a single frame for idle. I'll put the idle animation first, so it's the first one that plays. Now for the running animation, I'll need to set this to loop, and find a speed that makes sense. Yeah, there we go. I'll press apply, and now I've got a little armless character in scene. To get it to move around, I need to give it the top-down movement behavior, which is right here. I'll leave all of its variables alone. Oh, wait, no. I need to change that variable. Rotate object needs to be turned off. There we go. Now to animate that character, I need to go to the event sheet, where I'm going to use two different events, where if the character is moving, we'll change the animation. And if it's not, we'll change it to idle. So now if the character is moving, the animation will play running, and if it's not moving, it'll be idle. There we go. Now the next thing for a wave defense game is the gun. So I'm going to add the gun in as a separate object and put it into the scene. Next I'll need to go to the player and give it a point. I'll just call it gun, and then move that point down to the center-ish where the hands would be. That's good for now. And now I've got to go to the event sheet and tell the gun to be positioned at that point. So to get that point, I'll type in player, point, quotations, and then I can select gun. Alternatively, I could do this. Y position of point, select the player, and then select gun. It's the same way to get it, but once you get used to typing it in, you just do that. And we also want the gun to rotate towards the mouse. So I'll use the cursor X and the cursor Y. And the speed will be 0, so it happens immediately. And now if I preview the game, you'll see the gun is rotating towards the mouse, but the position is a little bit off. And the reason for that is simple. The origin point of the gun is in the top left. So if I'm positioning the gun on that point on the character, it should be in the center. Which in this case is 14 by 8. Here we go. Gun is in the center. Now the next thing I want to do is have the character flip. So to do that, we'll set it up so that if the mouse is on the right-hand side of the character, they'll look right, and if they're on the left-hand side of the character, they'll look left. So we need to check if the mouse is above or below the X position of the character, so on the right or the left. Okay, let's see if I did that right. Nope, that's backwards. There we go. Now for the gun. Now the gun we'll want to do the opposite for. Because it's already rotating towards the mouse, we need to flip it vertically for it to make sense. And there we go. Character moves, is animated, and the gun follows the mouse. The next thing to do is firing a bullet. So we thankfully have a wonderful extension in GDevelop. If I go to the behaviors and go to search for new behaviors, I can look for the fire bullet extension and add that. It comes with a lot of great things, but we don't need any of it right now. We just need to add a bullet object, which is just another sprite object, and then add an event for firing the bullet when I release the left mouse button. And I find for this, it's best to have it so that the bullet fires at the angle the gun is facing. So we'll be creating a bullet, but we need an X and Y position to create the bullet at. So for that, we'll go to the gun and add another point. And we'll drag it right there. If I go back in, I can use the expression builder. Get the X point. And get the Y point. We'll angle the bullet at the same angle as the gun. And set it to go at a speed of 100. Oh, there we go. It's a little bit off, but that's because we haven't set the center point. There we go. Now I just need to set it up so that it only happens when I release the left mouse button. Alright. And now for the sake of performance, we'll make it so that the bullets delete after they get off screen. And there is an extension for this, but I found it's easier to just use the distance from the player. If the camera follows the player, then once the bullet gets a certain distance away from the player, it's off screen. Whoops. This event needs to be inverted in order to work. There we go. You see it gets deleted once it gets a certain distance away from the player. There we go. Object picking. So, now we need to change that so it's wider than the screen. And that'll do it. Now for enemies. I'll create another sprite object for the enemy. Okay, then I'll add the health behavior to the enemy so we can easily kill it. I need to search this one up with the extensions again. And just like firing a bullet, there's lots of variables in there to play with, but we just need the health and that's it. So I'll set the starting health to 3 and the maximum as well. And now in the event sheet, we'll set it up so that if the bullet is in collision with the enemy, we delete the bullet and then subtract 1 health from the enemy by using the apply damage to an enemy action. There we go. And the last thing we do is check if the enemy is dead, and if they are dead, delete them. There we go. 1, 2, 3. Now we'll want to change the collision masks on these two objects so that they fit the image more. And that just makes more sense. And now the next thing I'm going to do is have the enemies spawn outside of screen and come in. And we'll have them do that towards some center object in the middle, whether it be a baby or a pet rabbit or whatever. I'm going to be doing the spawning with spawn points, as points for the enemies to spawn at. And now in the events, I need to set up a timer that will repeat, and when it finishes repeating, it will pick one of these points and spawn an enemy there. Okay, so to make this spawn at a different point each time, we need to add the condition pick a random object. And now every time that timer hits 1 second, it will pick a random spawn point and create the enemy at that point. And then we need to reset the timer. Okay, we can't see it, so hold on. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now the enemies need to spawn and move towards the center object. So we're going to apply a permanent force to get them there. Making sure not to use the physics force because we're not using the physics engine. So now we have the enemy moving towards the center with a permanent force of 20 pixels per second. And there we go. And now to give the game a fail state, we'll set it so that when the ghost is in collision with that center point, the game scene restarts. And we're doing that by just changing the game scene to what it is already. So if we start it, and they run into the center point, the game will just restart. Oh, that's something to fix. Gonna set it so that the screen doesn't expand. And there we go. That's the beginnings of a wave defense game. And now with the basic setup done, we're going to move on to some game polish. Fixing up some of the weaker points of the game, adding some sound effects and shake, and all of the things that make a game feel good to play. The first thing I need to do though, is go to the event sheet and organize a little bit because this is going to get a bit chaotic if we don't organize from the beginning. Always check to make sure things are still working the way they're supposed to. Yep, good. Now we can begin. So the first thing that we're going to do is deal with Z-ordering and the position of the enemies. Because we want our enemies to be looking at the position they're going to, rather than just off in the distance. So for Z-ordering, we're going to do something that makes a lot more sense when you see it in action. So we're going to go to the ghost and move its origin point down to the center bottom. Right there. This is going to be the point where Z-ordering kicks in and determines whether the ghost will be in front of or behind other objects in the scene. And we'll do the same thing for the player as well. Now, there is an extension for Z-ordering, but I personally don't like it because it means you have to add a behavior to every single enemy or object that needs to be affected. Personally, I just like to put things into a group and use that group for Z-ordering. Okay, so now that we have this, and all of the points have been changed, and everything is in a group, We just need a single action for z-ordering, where we tell the z-order of the player and the other objects to be equal to their y position, which is the y position of their origin point, which is now at their feet. And that's it. Now when I press preview, and the ghosts start to show in... Nope. 1 second. There we go. I had to change the gun Z order to be one above the player so it doesn't go behind them. Alright. Now as the ghosts spawn in, I'll be able to walk up to them and show you the Z ordering happening. And you can already see it with these two ghosts. The one that's lower down is behind the one that's ahead of it. But if I go to this ghost, I'll be nope. 1 second. Okay, if I go to this ghost, I'm behind it now, and now I'm in front of it. Behind, in front. Behind, in front. Behind, in front. And it's going to happen for all the ghosts in the scene to help give the game depth, so things look like they make sense. Alright, now I want to make it so that the ghosts are facing towards the center point, so they're not going backwards. Okay, so I've set it up so that if the enemy is to the right of the center point, it'll flip. And if it's to the left, it won't flip. So that way when they spawn in from the spawning action, it'll check this and then flip them accordingly. And there we go. Now they're all looking at the center point when they spawn in, so they're not going in backwards like they were before. The next thing I would like to do is give them health bars. And there are a lot of ways to do this. Like you could use the prefab objects that we already have in game, and that's a great option, but I'd probably use that for the player because the player is going to need to adjust for different things and get healed and so on. But just for an enemy health bar, you can just use a sprite object. Actually, it's probably better to use a tiled sprite for this. You gotta put in the size of your object, or the image. And now we'll want to spawn these in over the ghosts whenever we spawn in a ghost. So we'll be creating the health bar when we create a ghost object. And then we'll be using the action to link that health bar to the ghost, which will let us do something later. And because the ghost and the health bar are created at the same time, when we tell it to link, it's going to link two of those objects together because they've already been picked. And it will ignore all of the other ones in scene. So now that it's linked, I can make an event that positions shoot. You know what? This is actually easier with a sprite object because a sprite object you can change the center point. Hold on. When you're doing something like this, don't delete the object first because it will get rid of the events in the event sheet. We just need to change it to the new object and now delete the old one. Okay, there we go. Now, we want to position the object using both the X and Y positions. And we actually want to use a point on the ghost object. So we need to put that point in, call this health bar, and we want that to be above the ghost in the center. That should probably do it. And we want to change the health bar's origin to the center. Depending on the kind of game that you're working on, this may be a thing you need to do all the time, or not at all. So now that we have the point, somebody asked about this in the last video, so I'm going to show you. This is just a regular position action. It's not a position to a point or anything like that. It's just a regular position action in the position section of the actions. And then here, we can press on the expression builder, search point, click on the X position of a point, select the ghost enemy object, select health bar, because that's the point that we just made, and then do the same thing for the Y position. So now we have the X and Y position of that point. So the health bar will be positioned at the X and Y position of that point on the enemy object. But to make sure it picks the right ghost to be above, we need to use the condition take into account linked objects. And there we go. Now let's see if that worked. They should be oh, no. No health bars. No health bars. Let's see what's going wrong. We'll just disable that. Oh. The other ones are being left behind. One enemy has their health bar. Okay. There we go. Okay. So now we have each health bar following each ghost. What I had to do was use the repeat for each instance of enemy, or whatever object you want, event. So this way, for every single ghost on the scene, it's going to take into account if the health bar is linked with the enemy, and then position that health bar on top of that enemy. So before, it was doing it for one enemy, and because it was doing it, and doing it for one enemy, it was content, because it was doing what it was supposed to do. I didn't tell it to do it multiple times, so it did it once, and it was okay. And now we're going to need to delete those health bars, because otherwise they're going to get left behind when the ghost dies. Watch. Now it just floats there. So when the ghost is dead, take into account the link and delete the health bar. And didn't work. There we go. No, that deleted all of them. Hey, there we go. Don't judge me, I've only had 3 coffees. Let me just link that object picking video again up in the top corner. So now, the health bar deletes when the enemy does. Part of the problem was if I put it up here, yeah. So if I put the enemy above the event, then this happens first, and there's no enemy to check for this action. If I put it down here, then the health bar gets deleted first, and then the enemy. Now we're going to do a hit animation, and we're going to start by giving the ghost a knockback animation. We'll call the first one walking, and the next one hurt. There we go. Now, when the enemy gets hit with a bullet, we'll change their animation to hurt. Change it by name. And we'll make an event that checks to see if the enemy's animation is hurt, and if it's finished. And if that's the case, we'll change this animation back to walking. Or floating, I guess, but we're going to make other enemies and it's going to make more sense then. Okay, and the last thing we're going to do is make it so that if the enemy is hurt, they stop walking, which actually means that we need to change the way enemies go towards the center point. So instead of moving them with the permanent force, we're going to change this so that if the enemy's animation is not hurt, we'll use an instant force instead to move the enemy. There we go. Let me just fix the zoom not disabled anymore. And there we go. Oh, whoops. So currently, when you add a new animation to an object, it has those original origin points because it doesn't want to conflict with the existing ones. So we can go to the animations, go to hurt, just use the same points as the animations. Nope, not this one. Hold on. I need to go to walking, flip this switch, turn it on. There we go. And now this one has it. If I'd done it the other way around, it would have applied this image's points to the other one, which this one only had its origin point and center. So that would have been a bad thing. Cool. So now both animations have the same points and can be used as we want them to. Here we go. So shoot it. Hurt. Dead. Hurt. Okay, so you might have seen there that when I shot a ghost and it was already in hurt animation, it didn't change or react. And so now I've changed it so that when that animation triggers, it's actually going to set the frame to 0, so if it's already in that animation, it's going to restart it. So I said 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. I'll try to show a good example of it happening. There we go. That was about as good as it can get. And I noticed the Z order for the health bars were kind of off, so we need to fix that too. So we'll change the Z order for the health bars to be equal to the enemy's Z order plus 1. Sure. Actually, if we make it even, then it will be like a flat image, and that will work out better. Let's see if that worked. No, it didn't work. It doesn't know which one to check. Okay. Now, this isn't a big deal, but for performance I should probably do this. That way we don't have the same event triggering twice, checking every single enemy. So now it's in a single event where we're checking to see if the enemies are linked to the health bar, and then changing the position and changing the Z order. So first, we need to make the health bar represent the actual health of the ghost. So when they get hit, take into account the link. And we don't need the for each for this one because we've already got the ghost picked. And we'll change the width of the sprite object to equal the current health divided by the max health times the original size. And to get that, we can use the expression builder. This is using the health extension. So if you haven't got that extension installed, this won't be there. So the health points of the enemy, that's the current health, divided by the maximum health of the enemy, times the original width, which is 12 pixels. Because if we go back to the object and open it with Piscal, we can see it's 12 pixels wide. So it's the current divided by max times 12. And we'll see how that works. There we go. One shot left. Boom. Gone. So now that the health bar is working, I'm going to adjust the speed and everything of the character. And that's in the top-down behavior, because that's what we're using to move the character. Alright. Next I'll add the collisions for the walls because someone asked for that in the comments. I'm going to add a sprite object for that and just spread it out over the walls. Okay, now I can go to the event sheet and go to the players group, movement, and make it so the player gets separated from the wall. And the player is the first object so that it gets moved and not the wall. when separating the two objects. All right, now when I go in, I cannot walk past the walls. There we go. Now it looks like I can walk up to the wall, but I get stopped down here. I could have gone into the room itself, gone to the collision mask, and added in several different kinds of collision masks for the walls, which I've done before, but honestly, it's a slow way to do it. If you're just using a single room like this or something static, it's just easier to build out a collision mask like this with a separate object. It just means that at the beginning of scene, you need to hide it. And it's gone. But I still can't walk past it. The player just can't see it. And while we're doing collisions, we should probably also do the ghost enemy. So here in the ghost enemy object, we can make a new event and then use the action to separate two objects to make it so that the enemy is separated from the group entities. Yeah, there we go. So you can see they're pushing away from each other. I just noticed actually, hold on. I never changed the collision mask. So I go to this one, yeah, it's the full size of the image. So I need to go to this one, which is the collision mask that I want shared, and toggle it on. And this will share same collision masks for all animations, which means if I go to this one, it'll be that. So now when I shoot them, it doesn't push them all away. They do stop though, because there's something in front of them trying to stop them from moving. And that way they won't be able to overlap and group up like they did before. And now, up to this point, I've been able to spam the bullet. As fast as I can click, it'll spawn. Well, if we go to the gun and go to the fire bullet behavior, you can see that the cooldown is 0.1 seconds. And we can just change that to 0.5 or something like that. There we go. And because there's a cooldown on there, we can change this to actually be mouse button is pressed instead. So that way we can hold on to the button and it'll fire at that fire rate. You don't want to go too fast with bullets because there's a chance for them to clip through the object before it gets recognized as a collision. But that's pretty good. And now for firing a bullet, let's add a sound effect. We can use the condition has just fired for the gun to play a sound. I don't have one picked yet, so I'm going to go to create one. And I'm just going to pick something randomly until I get something good. So we'll call that gun, save, set a volume, and of course, randomize pitch. Because if you have a sound that plays repeatedly, you need to make sure that it randomizes so it doesn't drive your player nuts. So 0.8 to 1 means it'll be a little bit less or exactly the pitch of what it was before. Alright, now there's a secret weapon for all game devs out there who might want this. Camera shake. And now we can go into the events and add in screen shake when the bullet has been fired. Ooh, that's a bit too intense. So we need to change the settings to make it a little bit less annoying. And we do this by going in and having an action, and we do this by going in and using the action to change certain aspects of the shake. Alright, so now that we've set up the camera settings using the actions at the beginning of scene, we have something that's pretty okay. To cover up those edges, we're going to change the background color. So we'll go to Piskel, use the color picker tool to get the color, and then apply that color to the background. And there we go. Now when the screen shakes, you can't see those edges anymore. Now one more thing that we can add in is some object shake for the gun. And that again is an extension called shake object. Put that on the gun. And then in the event sheet, at the point where the gun is fired, we'll set it so the gun shakes along with the screen to add to the effect. And let's see what that looks like. Okay, now one more thing I'm going to add in is my secret weapon. So I'm going to add in a vignette. Turn the grid back on so it goes in place properly. And to make sure the vignette stays above everything, I'm going to put it on a different layer. Select the vignette, go to properties, and change the layer to vignette. Now I will need to zoom in because otherwise it will do this, because the main game zooms in and the vignette doesn't. And there we go. So now on the edges of the screen, the character is a little bit darker, and on the inside, it's a little brighter. And now that we've brought the game up to a certain level of polish, we're going to add menus and settings to the game to make it a more complete package. So let's get started. So the first thing we need to do is go to another scene for the main menu. I'll start by adding a bitmap text. Because the resolution of this game is a little bit smaller than you would normally make, the regular text object would look blurry in this setting, so you really want to use a bitmap text if you're using any resolution that's not at least 1280. For a bitmap text, you need the bitmap font and an atlas image. And the font basically tells the engine how to break up the image to turn it into a font. And the image can actually be edited with any kind of image editing software. So you can make some pretty fancy custom text with bitmap text. And now I'll just copy that to make some extra buttons for the menu. Before I make the rest of the text objects, I'm going to install the extension button states. And add it to the play text object, because then I can use that as a button. In the event sheet, I can use is clicked as a condition for future events. Now I'm going to create a marker object that I can use to center the camera on. And I'm going to create two of these so that when I press settings, I can tween over to the next section of the menu and show the settings. So I've got the main menu part and the settings part. And from here, I can use the user interface objects, like the toggle switch, buttons, and sliders, to create my settings menu. And I'm going to start with the sliders. Alright, and from here, when I press settings, it's going to tween the camera over to the settings menu. Okay, and I made a settings marker object because otherwise I would need to use variables to decide which one was which, and this is less complicated. So we'll be tweening between the marker for the main menu and the marker for the settings menu. And there we go. So we're tweening to the center X of this bar and the camera's center Y position, which it's already at. So that won't change. And now I'm going to set it up so that when I press back, we go back to that original menu. And there we go. And actually, I'm going to set it up so that the title stays in place while the menu changes, just as a personal preference. So I'm going to make a new layer called title, and then put that title object on that layer so it won't be affected when the camera tweens. All right. Next, I'm going to hide those bars. Okay. And now the rest of the buttons. So now when the play button is clicked, it will change the scene to the untitled scene, which is our original game scene. And when the back button is clicked, we'll quit the game. There we go. And when the quit button is clicked, we'll quit the game. There we go. So now all of the buttons do something. Now let's make the settings do something. So we're going to create some global variables. We'll make a structure. Call this settings. Make one for sound and music. All right. Now we'll go back into the event sheet and make it so that the value of the sound bar or the music bar dictates that variable. And we'll use the expression builder to get the value for that bar. Okay, so when the sound slider bar is being dragged, we change the global variable sound settings that we just made to equal the value of that bar. And we'll do the same thing for music. All right, so now when the music slider is being dragged, it'll change that value. And if there is music being currently played or sounds being played while that slider is being moved, and you want them to dynamically shift, you'll need to change that as well, using one of the actions for volume of the music or sound on that channel. So you'd slot that in right here. But for sound effects, we'll use this setting when playing those. So if we go back into the main game and find the point where the sound for the gun is played, we'll change the volume to equal that global variable. So now when we change that setting, it's going to affect this sound when it gets played. So now if I open the menu and go to settings, I can change sound to be up here at 100, go back, press play. You can hear the sound played. But if I go to the menu, go to settings, change the sound down low to just above 0, it's been turned down. But every time I go into the game, it's going to be back at that same level again, so we need to save and load that in. And it's been a little while since I've done this, so bear with me. So we'll be writing a text, and we'll be writing that entire settings structure into a save file outside of the game. So settings. So when we click back, it's going to write settings into an external folder or external file outside of the game. And then, at the beginning of the scene, we'll read this text, settings from the storage settings, and store it as a temporary settings text. And then we can add the action to parse or convert this text into our global variables. So we select the settings structure. And then we're going to change the position of that slider bar based on the new value. So we're setting the sound slider and music slider to the global variables that we just read into the engine and converted to global variables because they come in as scene variables. And then we use those global variables to set the value on those slider bars. So let's try that out. Okay, now I'll press back, and that's going to be where we save the settings. So now they're saved. So if I exit and preview it again and go to settings, they didn't save. Okay, I know what I was doing wrong. So it's not just a string of the structure. You need to actually convert the global variable to a JSON first. Now select settings, apply. So now it's saved as a JSON, then it's gonna get read back in, and yeah, okay. Preview. Settings. Set the settings. Back. Quit. Preview. Settings. And there where they were before. Awesome. Okay, so now the settings are saved when we come back in. Same thing when we go play the game. If I skip back to here, settings, they're saved. Okay. Great. So they save as a JSON here, and then they're read back into the engine as a temporary file in the scene variables, and then they get converted from that JSON to a readable global variable in settings. Cool. And then these two actions change the sliders to represent what they actually are. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. Now the next thing is highlighting. So when you hover over a button, it lights up. If you have a button object, this will happen the way it does already. It just changes the animation for the object. One of these objects here, the panel sprite buttons. But if you're using text like this, you instead need to add an effect to it. So we'll just add this to all of our buttons. And then we'll create a group and call it buttons. And we'll add two events, one for if the button is hovered, then the effect is on, and if the button is not hovered, then the effect is off. We'll use the group. Alright, so if the button is hovered, it's on, and if the button is not hovered, it is off. And if the button is not hovered, it is off. There we go. All right, now just make this blend in with the actual game itself. We'll snag this color and drop it in here. There we go. Now, really quickly, the last thing I want to do is add a transition, really quickly. So for this, we're gonna go to the extension list and add an extension for transition. And with that installed, we're going to add a paint shaper object, change the fill color to black, and we'll put it in the scene so it's there. Now, we need to give it the behavior first. So now, when the play button is clicked, okay, and we'll change this so that when the transition finishes, then we will change scenes. We'll want to put this on the title layer so it's above everything else, above the title specifically. Okay, and you'll notice on the edges, it doesn't reach the edges before the transition happens. I've noticed that to be a thing that can be tweaked. So we're going to go to Add Layer, call this Transition Layer, and then at the beginning of scene, zoom, camera, transition layer by 1.5. Now it goes to the edge of the screen, and then for the other side, we'll do the same thing. So we can just set this to be a global object. Awesome. Go over here, place this into scene, add a transition layer, put this onto it, and then do the same thing. The only difference is that we need to do the reverse now for the transition so it shrinks instead of expands. So we'll set this to circular again, and backwards this time instead of forwards. So when this scene starts, nope. Oh, this is in seconds. 1 second. There we go. Okay. So now when we press play, does this and then this, and we're into the game. Now with the menus and settings done, we're going to move on to some more game mechanics, and we're starting with leveling up. The very first thing that we need is a leveling bar, and thankfully GDevelop has one in the asset store that will match this game's style already. We just need to put it on a different layer so it's above all of the gameplay. Alright, now we need to make some scene variables for leveling up. The first ones, of course, being the current and maximum experience for leveling up, and then all of the stats we want to actually level up. And we'll start with something small for the maximum experience points. And now we need to link the resource bar object with those stats. And there we go. Now it's 0 out of 10 because 10 was the amount of experience you need to actually level up. But now we need experience points. And for that I'm going to create a new sprite object and just make a little white dot to use as the experience point. That is way too big. That's much better. Okay. And now we'll make it so that the ghosts drop these whenever they die. There we go. And then we need to be able to pick them up to use them as EXP. Let's see if that worked. There we go. Now when we kill a ghost and get close enough to the experience point, it adds it to our scene variable, which is used to control the EXP bar. But running this every single frame would be a lot, so we're going to change this to this and this. So it's only doing that whenever we actually run into an EXP point. And to fix this at the beginning of scene, I'm just going to change the default values of the bar. So now they line up. But that's not very fun to look at, so we're going to change it so that the points go to you whenever you get close enough, and then when they get really close to you, they'll actually get picked up. And there we go. Maybe a little faster though. So now we're able to level up. But what happens when we actually reach the max level? Currently nothing, but I'm going to create a new layer with some buttons on it to spend points whenever we level up. Again, adding the bitmap font that I added in earlier. And because people have been asking, this font plus all of the assets will be available in a folder in the description from now on, so you can actually follow along yourself. Alright, so now we have a text object that says power, fire rate, and accuracy that we can modify when we update the stats, and buttons that we can actually use for those stats. One for power, one for fire rate, and then one for accuracy. And then for accuracy, we actually need to tank the accuracy to make it make sense. We'll change this to 20 and see how that does. 0 would be perfect accuracy, 20 is off by an angle of 20. That might be a bit too much, but it's fine for now. Alright, so we'll hide the level up layer, and then in the event sheet, make it so that when the current EXP level hits the max, we'll pause the game, show that layer, and then when they spend their point on that thing, go back to the game again. I always set it to greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to, just in case something happens where you pick up 2 with the exact same frame or something like that. It's just safer that way. Alright, so now when we hit the maximum number for the EXP, we'll set the timescale to 0, show the level up layer, and then set the current EXP back to 0 so we start over again. And while we're doing this, it's a good idea to have the scaling happen here. So we'll change the scene variable for the max EXP to something like twice of what it currently is. There we go. So now when this happens, well, let me just show you actually. Oh. I need to be good at the game to actually show you, I guess. And there we go. Now the game is frozen, and this should fix itself once that's done. And we can press one of these buttons. No, we can't. We can't do that yet. Okay, so I need to add this part into the actual event sheet. And while I'm at it, I need to add a darkening layer here so it's not this bright. Okay, so I used a shape painter object to make a black rectangle the size of the screen, and then change its Z order to be lower than everything else on that layer. And we'll change this to 180, and that way it won't be completely black, it'll be transparent and you'll be able to see the background. So the next thing we'll do is make it so that the buttons actually do something, and when you press them, you go back to the game with the improved stats. I'll put all of the buttons into a group to make it easier. Now, because we have the button state extension installed, you can see two of them, but this is for the panel sprite buttons and this is for the button state extension. So now when one of these buttons gets pressed, we'll hide the level up layer, change the scale back to 1, and then update the bar. But now for the actual leveling up part. So because we have the gun object with the behavior on it for fire bullet, this is what we'll be updating. So we'll be changing the fire cooldown rate and the angle variance whenever we change the level of the stat. But also, we're going to do that for when we hit the enemy. So right now it's applying 1 point of damage to the enemy, but we're going to change that to the stat for power so that when they get hit, they take more than 1 hit worth of damage. So for the accuracy, I've changed the angle variance, which is how much it'll miss by multiplying it by the angle variance, which I got using the expression builder, times 0.9. So each time this gets picked, it's going to hack off 10% of the current value, which means as this level gets higher, the accuracy getting added to it is going to be less and less as it gets closer and closer to 0, which is perfect accuracy. And then I did the same thing for the firing cooldown, which is the fire rate. So we'll be changing the stat number in the scene variables so we can use that for displaying it, but the actual change is happening here in this second action. Whereas for the power variable, we're actually going to change that up above. So right here where the enemies are taking damage, get rid of that 1 and change it to scene variable for power. So now they'll be taking the power as your damage instead of 1. And the last thing I want to do is change it so that the stats actually change in the level up page. So for that, I'm going to go here again, copy this, come back here and go to bitmap to change the text of the bitmap object. Stats equal quotations, and this is going to get a little messy, but bear with me. So the 1 quotations power, so we got the power stat plus power. So now it's going to show power to here plus this variable for power, and then we'll add a plus here and another quotation. There we go. And so now it's this And then down here, we'll do the same thing. I'll just copy all of this, paste it, get rid of the plus on this end because this will be the end of it, and the quotation. And then this will be changed to, this is the fire rate, and the accuracy is being changed to the accuracy. There we go. So now power, fire rate, accuracy, showing the variables for power, fire rate, and accuracy. Let's see if that worked. That is not how it's supposed to go. That accuracy is quite a bit worse. Okay. Set to and set to. There we go. Okay. Let's try that. Okay, yeah. There we go. Oh. And the power is by default at 0, so let's change that as well. We'll set all of these to 1 to start with. Okay. And I'm actually going to add a cheat down here. I usually put my cheats down at the bottom of the screen. So I'll change it so that if the K key is pressed, we'll change the current variable to variable, scene variable, max exp. So we'll just set it straight to max exp when I press K. Okay. So when the game starts, I'll pick accuracy, press K, and we'll level up instantly. I'll press fire rate, and now it's changed to 20. So on the second level, it'll take 20 to level up. I'll press K again, upgrade power, 40, and now it's 2, 2, and 2. Upgrade power again. And when I shoot this ghost, it should die in 1 hit. Yeah. And that's because now the power is level 3, so we're doing 3 points of damage when we hit them. And the fire rate should be up. Let's try to crank that up. Oh yeah, that's way faster. Accuracy is a little bit too much, I think, though. I may need to turn that down a bit more. Okay, I just noticed that the background darkening layer isn't showing up, so I need to fix that. And the problem is that it's drawing it right here, but it's only doing that once because this is only true for 1 frame. And if we go to the paint shaper object, no, not for transition, for darken, it is clearing the rendered image between each frame, so it's only doing it once for a single frame and then disappearing. So I'm going to turn this off and turn that off because I don't want it relative to the actual position of the object in scene. And I'm going to change this to be at the beginning of scene instead, so it does it once at the beginning of scene and then doesn't clear it away afterwards. And we'll see if that works. So now if I press K, oh, because the base layer is zoomed in and this is 0, so that's why it's pulled over to the left. Okay, so I need to change this to the level up layer. There we go. Because there's 2 different cameras. The base layer is zoomed in and the level up layer is not zoomed in. There we go. So now it's the whole size of the level up layer's camera. And if I press power, it goes away. And if I level up again, it's there. Great. I might change this to be down here though. Might change this to here instead of here. So when I level up, yeah, it does it automatically and it's already down to 0. Yeah, there we go. Now that leveling up is done, we're going to go ahead and add some more enemies to the game to give it some more variety. We'll stick with basic enemy behaviors for now, but we'll add some more interesting behaviors later. So let's get started. Currently there's just the one enemy type, so I'm going to add 2 more sprite objects with the same kind of animations and variables to go along with it. So I'm just going to copy this one and change out the images. And now that that's done, I'm going to put them all into a group and I'm going to call it enemies. And now if I put these into the game, they should react just like... Oh no, wait, hold on. Okay, so in the events sheet, I can swap out anything that was called ghost enemy and change it to enemies, the group. Make sure that's the right spelling. Alright, and if I press replace, all of these points here should all be changed to enemies of the group instead. Just need to double check that it actually worked. Okay. Now if I start the game, they're getting hurt, they're going towards it. Obviously the health bar is breaking because they weren't supposed to have that. There we go. Okay. So that worked out. Now we need to be able to spawn those enemies in, separate from the way that we spawn in ghosts. And for that I'm actually going to implement a wave system. So I'm going to add a text object, call it wave number. Pick the same font, I guess. And we'll put it on the UI layer. There we go. And now we'll create a new timer. Call it wave, and then add an event where we check if the timer is above, let's try 5 seconds just for testing. And we'll create a scene variable, call it wave as well, have it start at 1, and we'll change this to 1. Okay. And add the action to change the scene variable, wave, by adding 1 to it. Alright, there we go. And we'll change the enemy spawning rate to equal the wave. So the higher the wave is, the faster enemies will spawn. Let's say 3 seconds divided by the variable of wave. Variable is just the scene variable of wave. So every 5 seconds that will go up, and we will modify the text of the wave number to equal, in quotations, wave plus that, it needs to be a text variable. So we will change this to, we'll search through the expression builder to get it, because it's easier. Scene variable, number, wave. There we go. It adds the toString for us to make it a text instead of a number. Okay. Now let's try that. Alright, so 1 enemy spawned. Because we're on wave 1, so it's 3 divided by 1, so it's 3 seconds. This didn't change. They seem to be coming in faster. Oh no, they're not. Need to reset this. and change the scene variable to be equal to 1. Oh, this needs to be wave as well. Wave. There we go. Okay, now try this. Okay, so there's one enemy. We're on wave 3 now, so I should get 1 every second. We're on wave 4, so I should get 1 every 3/4 of a second. And it's going to speed up to the point where it's going to get ridiculous. Okay, cool. So that works. But we'll change this to something more reasonable, like 30 seconds. Now on top of this, I'm going to change it so that the health of the enemies is going to actually change along with it. So when we're here and we create the enemy, we'll change the health of that enemy's group to equal 3 plus that wave variable divided by 3 and rounded down. Okay, so floor will round it down if it's less than a whole number. So when we're on wave 3, the enemies will have 4 health because it'll be 3 plus 1. And then it won't go up again until we reach wave 6 when they'll have 5 health and so on and so on. Okay. Change that there. We want to change the maximum and their current health as well. Change their health points to equal their max health. Okay. Now let's try that out. So we need to get to wave 4 to see this work in action. Oh. We'll change this to 5 again and do that. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Wave 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3. Oh, there we go. Okay. You get the idea. So when this enemy is created, their max health and current health get changed based on the wave variable. And now to make it so that the enemies spawn at different wave levels. To do this, we'll add another scene variable. Properties, scene variable, add, I'll just call it random enemy. And then when enemies get spawned, I'll use an event to change that number so it picks a different enemy. Nope. So we use random in range, so it'll pick a whole number, 0, 2, and we'll need a little bit of algebra for this. If we want a new enemy to show up every 3 waves, then we can do it the same way that we did it for the health. So let's go there. Maximum health. We'll steal this. Copy. Okay, paste in here. So now, when an enemy gets created, this scene variable is going to change from 0 to whatever this will be. So if we're below the 3rd wave, it will be less than a whole number, so it'll get rounded down to 0. So this will be 0, 0. If we're at wave 3 to 6, or 3 to 5, this will round down to 1, so it'll be 0 to 1. And then if we're on wave 6 or above, or 6 to 8, this will round down to 2, so it'll be 0, 2. So it'll be 0, 1, or 2. And then we want it to stop there because if we go beyond that, we'll have more numbers than we have enemies for. So for that, we'll use min, which is another expression that's wonderful to have. We need a comma right here. Yep, there we go. And then 2. Nope. What? There we go. Okay. Brackets. Okay, so now it's 0 or the wave variable divided by 3, rounded down, And then min, so it'll pick the smallest number out of the two options, which is either this or 2, which means if the variable for the wave goes above 9, which would turn this into 3, which is more enemies than we actually have, instead, this min expression will change this to 2. So it'll pick 2 instead of the 3 because it's the smaller number. Okay. So this is either 0 or whatever enemy number we're at. And now we need to modify this quite a bit by moving all of this down here. We'll use the scene variable as the condition. Scene variable for random enemy. And if it equals 0, we'll spawn the ghost enemy. And since it's already at 0 by default, then it's going to pick the ghost enemy for the first 3 waves. And then on the, if it picks 1, we'll spawn, we'll spawn the spider. And if it picks 3, or 2, sorry, we'll spawn the imp. Okay, we'll see if this works. So we should only see ghosts for the first 3 waves. Oh. There's a spider. The spider stole the health bar. Ah, this should be changed to enemies. It must not have been changed with the search bar. Okay, so now I need to make these apply to each enemy type. So I'm going to shuffle these around and change the names so they work with each enemy as they spawn. And now I can copy this down for each enemy. Okay, so now when the number gets picked for the enemy, it creates the enemy object and then applies the health and creates the health bar and links it to that specific enemy. And it'll do that for each one. And then regardless of which one gets picked, it's going to reset the timer and pick a new number. So the next time it'll be a new number and we get a different enemy. Now let's see if that worked. Here come the ghosts on the first 3 waves. More ghosts. Oh, there's spiders. More spiders. They each have individual health bars. Increase power. Ooh. It's hard to tell, but also they also have higher health. And there comes the imps. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So their health was going up, so the imp at the end had 5 health because I shot it twice with an attack that had 2 power, and it still had 1 health left. So now, to make a little bit of variation there, I'm going to change the base health of the spiders and imps, so they'll operate differently. There we go, so now the spiders will have 2 health, the imps will have 4, and the ghosts will have 3, and then that will just scale up as they go. But to make them also a little more different, I'm going to change how they move. So I'm going to affect this event here, and change this to imp, ghost, and spider. Oh, that is the wrong event. Here we go. So I'll make 3 different versions for this. Change this to ghost, change this to spider, and change this to imp. Okay, so now the imp will move towards the center at a speed of 8. So it's a little slower, but it has more health. And then the spider will do 12. Let's see how much of a difference that is. See if we want more or less. Maybe we need a little bit more of a difference. Yeah, there we go. That should be enough. Oh, you're not stopping. Oh. Had these backwards. There we go. Yeah. Great. So now we have 3 different enemies in-game that are a little different from each other, spawn based on the number of the wave that we're in and how difficult the game is, have their health scale to go along with the difficulty of the game, and it's all working as intended. And now that we have the basic enemies in the game, we're gonna go make each one seem more unique. And then at the very end of the video, we're going to add mobile controls, so then you'll be able to release this game on desktop or mobile devices. So let's jump in. Now the quickest way to give your enemies some movement is to use the Boids extension, which I kind of overuse, but it's really good for giving basic enemies some more interesting movement. So we'll just give that behavior to the ghost enemy. There we go. And now go to enemies, and instead of telling it to move, I'm going to tell it to go towards the center using the Boids extension. I'm going to tell it to go towards an object, and the object is the center. Decision weight, we'll just start with 10 and see how that works. And now we'll preview the game. Okay, that's way too fast. And they were rotating. So let's turn off rotation and turn down the max speed a lot. And let's see how that works out. There it comes. Still too fast. And it's kind of beelining for the center. So we need to change that as well. Let's change the decision weight down to 2 and see what that does. Change it to 0.5. See if that helps. Oh, there we go. Now we're getting that kind of I'll be there eventually behavior. That's what I want. I'm gonna tweak the values a little bit and then come back. Okay, there we go. So I've tweaked the speeds a little bit and I've changed it so that now the ghost tries to avoid the player. So when you're playing the game, you can try to chase them off away from the center, which makes them a much more interesting and kind of dynamic enemy, but also makes them a little random. So if you get your hands on this game, you might want to tweak the values on these things. All right, now I'm going to do the same thing to the imp, but I'm going to make it different on how they approach the center. I'll give them the same behavior. Leave all that alone. I want them to be even slower than the ghost. Not rotate. I don't want them to be afraid of the player. Okay. And now I'm also going to give them the fire bullet extension as well, so they can fire at the center. There we go. Let's make their firing cooldown every 4 seconds. Put one into the scene. Going to create a new object, sprite. Okay, so we'll go here, make a new group, imp, and we'll make it so that when the imp is we change the fire rate in the extension itself, or the behavior itself, to 4 seconds. So we can just make it shoot or fire bullet towards a position from the imp. Oh no, wait. Fire the bullet. Nope, here. Fire the bullet from the imp. And we'll go from the imp's center, X and Y, to the center objects, center, X and Y. And make it go at 50, I guess. Okay, and we'll see if that works. It should fire a... There it is, yep. Okay, great. The bullet's a little bit out of alignment because I haven't changed the points. Change its origin to its center. Now see how it looks. There we go, great. And now we'll change this down to 40. And we'll change the imp's movement speed down slower. Go 10 and 10. All right, now I want to make this so that you can block these bullets with your own body, because why not? I can do what I want to. And you can change this if you open the example later and want a different thing. So let's create a new event here. If the enemy bullet is in collision with the player, delete enemy bullet. So that way you have a way to combat these bullets when they fly in. So when they shoot the bullet, yeah, I can run into it and stop it. All right. I will want to change the player's collision mask, I think, a little bit. Yep. Let's bring this down. Okay. All right, and that is the imp done. And now for the spider. I'm not going to use Boyd's movement for the spider because that gives like a floating effect. Instead, I'm going to use points and spawn the spider and use the movement behavior that we've already got set up. So I'm going to duplicate this and call this the spider spawn. And put a couple points in here. Here and here. Maybe a couple more. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to add another object in. Call this shadow. If you've ever seen those hand enemies, the evil hand enemies from Zelda back in the day, this is what I'm doing. Adding a new sprite object. Call this drop. Great, change the center point to the center. Oh wait, no. It needs to be the same as the spider. So spider's points, its origin is 1222. Cancel. Shadow points 1222. And the drop object 1222. And this is only going to work because the shadow image and the drop image are both the exact same size as the spider image, the full size of it. And now we go to the spawning. And we're going to create both of those objects, shadow and the drop. Move the spider down here. Add a wait action. Let's say 1 second. And I need to give both of these objects the tween behavior. Tween. Wait. Not tween Z order. Just the normal tween. Okay. Drop. Add the tween behavior. There it is. All right, and then tween. Y position. No, we'll start with scale. We'll call the tween grow and we'll go to full scale. Easing can be linear, I guess. Again, this can be changed because it's not a big deal. 1000 milliseconds and then destroy. I'm not going to scale from the center. I'm going to scale from the origin, I believe. Move this here. We're going to change the spot that this spawns at to the spider spawn point. And the same thing for the drop object. We'll pick a random spider spawn point. And we'll do another tween for the Y position of the drop object. We'll call this drop. And we'll go down 100, so we fall down 100. And again, we'll stick with linear. 1000 milliseconds, destroy object when it's done. All right, so these here are here. Now we need to spawn above the spider spawn point 100 pixels. So that way when we drop, we go, hold on, negative. Negative is up. And so that way when we drop, we go from 100 above down to the actual position itself. Also spawn at the same spider spawner. What's going to happen is we're going to spawn these objects, tween them to the right position, and then have the spider spawn at those positions when they get destroyed by the tweening event. I'm going to change this to 0 for right now to make it force the spiders to spawn first. Hey, there's one. Okay, all right. So they are dropping. Not exactly greatly, but they're dropping properly. What's not happening is a scale event. So we'll scale the sprite object of the shadow to 0. So then it's going to start at 0 and go to tween up. So let's try that. Oh, there we go. There's another one. So now it looks like they're falling from the ceiling. I'm going to change the position of that spawning point though, because that's a bit weird. Let's change the spawning point to the center. There we go. And perfect. Oh, I'm going to actually, beginning of scene, hide those spider spawners. So they're still there, we just can't see them. Okay, cool. And now you can see the spiders are dropping. And because the object that's dropping is not the spider itself, I can't shoot it. Alright, great. So now we have 3 unique enemies that all act differently. The ghost kind of hovers around and meanders its way to the center. The spider runs towards the center after dropping from the ceiling. And the imp will actually fire a fireball that I didn't code properly. Hold on. Okay, game over. We'll also add if the enemy bullet hits the center, game over. So we need to use or. And then put this inside of the or condition. So now, if the enemy gets to the center, or if the enemy bullet gets to the center, it's game over and we start over. Now let me just playtest that to make sure it actually works. And as a nice twist, the ghosts now being afraid of you means that they won't go towards the center. So you'll kind of have an ever-increasing swarm of ghosts around the center until you choose to run off and grab the experience points or run off to try to protect the center from one of the fireballs. Now, there's one thing I did notice though, and that's that these enemies aren't necessarily looking the right way anymore because the code has changed for how they spawn. So, I'm gonna need to change this forever. So they won't just do it when they spawn, they'll do it always. Okay, now I need to fix a bug that somebody mentioned in one of the earlier comments. The leveling up layer exists whether or not you can see it. So even during gameplay, if you click where that button is on screen, you will get that level up without the experience points required. Okay, so the button's clicked. So we need to add a second condition here for if the layer is currently visible. So we can search for visibility of a layer, the leveling up layer. So we will only be able to click on the button if the leveling up layer is actually showing. So that bug is now fixed. Great. Now the last thing I want to do in this video, before I run out of time, is add mobile controls because people have been asking for that and it's really quick. So watch this. Joystick. I like these joysticks. Okay, we'll create another layer. Call this mobile controls. We'll call this movement. Plop this down, shrink it down a little bit because it's a bit big. You can find the size you want. Maybe a little bigger. There we go. And then I will duplicate this and call it aiming. All right, so now movement and aiming. For the player, I'm going to go to behaviors, add a behavior, and once you've added a joystick, you should have top-down multi-touch controller mapper. Top-down movement, analog, great. So I've added the behavior to the player, I press preview. I've got to put the object on the layer, right. Mobile controls, okay, preview. Top-down behavior plus this, plus the mapper behavior, and it works. Now for aiming. Let's plop this one down, make it the same size, so 96 by 96, and roughly the same spot. Okay. All right, now for this, it's gonna be a little bit trickier, but we'll collapse all of this, go to the player, go to gun, check if this is a mobile device, and change this to not. Make a new action, move that there. All right, so if it's not a mobile device, we will rotate the gun towards the cursor. If it is a mobile device, we will rotate the gun towards the angle. angular speed 0, angle of that joystick. So joystick, stick angle. I think it's 2, and secondary. We will make sure that's right. So we go to here, go to aiming, change this to 2, and make this secondary. All right. And so now, because I'm on a laptop and this is not a mobile device, I'm going to just remove that condition really quickly and disable that, just for testing. And put this on the mobile control layer. There we go. So now the gun aims in the direction of the joystick. Great. Okay, so this will work. It's just the problem is that it's fighting two conflicting orders. So we will copy these and disable both of these right now, just for testing. And there we go. Now the gun and the player rotate with the joystick. Because we're using the condition joystick pushed in a direction, and then using the proper number and joystick name, and then the direction. So if it's pushing right, it's gonna not flip, and if it's pushing left, it will flip. Just like when the cursor was on one side or the other of the player. And now we will use the condition mobile device. And again, but inverted. All right. And then put this here, and we are good. So if it's not a mobile device, it's going to use the cursor's position. If it is a mobile device, it will rotate towards the joystick's angle. And then for the flipping, this will happen. We do need to change it though, so that, or to here, either the left joystick or mouse button is down. No, hold on. And. Okay, back to the mobile device thing. So if it's not a mobile device, this is an AND condition. If the left mouse button is pushed down and it's not a mobile device, then this will be true. This is an OR condition. So if that is true, or the joystick is pushed down, let's try that. Okay, so if it's above 0, if the force on the joystick is above 0, so it's being moved at all. Yeah, so when I'm clicking anywhere else, it doesn't work. Holding the joystick does work. So I've got movement and joystick. We'll change that back to not a mobile device, and we have our controls all set up. Sorry if it looks a little bit complicated, but you need to have separate controls for mobile and not mobile. So, all right. That's the game. We'll move this down below the transition so you can't see it when you first start the game. And we will set it up so that, copy this. If it is not a mobile device, we will just delete the mobile controls, which are movement and aiming. So now when I start the game and it's not a mobile device, because it's my laptop, they're gone. and the game plays normally. Alright. And that has been the entire series on making a wave defense game.